And we're back. We have Adrian Chavez. Adrian, this is your first time on. So for people who aren't familiar with you, can you tell us about yourself?
So I have a PhD in nutrition, and I also have a master's degree in exercise science. So the reason that I have both of those degrees and they're I kind of went separate paths or seemingly separate paths is I was initially interested in sports performance and I wanted to train athletes. I did my master's thesis on ACL injury prevention actually, and that's when I got really interested in nutrition because there was a point where I had some health issues, made some changes to my diet, and I just realized that there was an element of nutrition that I didn't understand that was a lot more powerful than I ever really understood or recognized. So like I was able to see significant positive improvements in my health that I didn't expect because I was already eating like a quote unquote healthy diet of like, the right macros and stuff, but really changed my diet for the better in terms of like micronutrient intake and just overall eating a higher quality diet, and saw the improvements of that. So that kind of led me to get a PhD in nutrition. That was about a decade ago. Been working in various avenues since then, mostly educating, working with clients. Have worked with clients with a variety of different issues, different health issues, and also have put out lots of educational content. Have created a podcast that called the Nutrition Science Podcast, and a few other things around that as well.
Yeah, I initially heard of you pretty recently on the Fact Check podcast and y'all's two-part episodes, which I thought was great. And I wanted to bring you on to discuss nutrition and more specifically in the context of rehab after an injury. And we'll dive right into it. So there's nutrition and dietary priorities for general healthy individuals, but I wanted to know if there are priorities that change or recommendations that change based off of someone experiencing an injury or post-operative rehab. So let's go into what are the major priorities that someone should consider or that you discuss with people when they're recovering from an injury.
Yeah, so when you're recovering from an injury, there are a few things that we do really need to pay attention to that are pretty evident in the literature. And so we'll talk about those. And the first thing is going to be overall calorie intake. And so if you're eating too few calories in order to provide your body with the energy that it needs to properly recover from that injury, that's going to be detrimental to recovery. So that's important, is ensuring that you're not eating too little calories. On the other side of things, we don't want to eat too many calories because especially if you're an athlete, you're trying to go back to sports, you definitely don't want to gain body fat while you're injured and probably more physically inactive. And then also that can also exacerbate inflammatory responses as well. Like if you're eating too many calories, that can create a little bit more inflammation, which can potentially interfere with proper recovery. So we definitely don't want to be eating too many calories, don't want to be eating too little calories. There is, and it's going to depend on how much the injury impacts your activity. So for everyone, this is going to be there's going to be a lot of factors at play here, because if you're extremely active and you experience an injury that causes you to be completely immobile, then there's going to be a significant reduction in your energy expenditure. So you're going to probably need to eat less calories as a result, because you're more physically inactive. So we have to take a few things into consideration: how much your physical activity changes when you get injured, and then also that injury for most people is going to require a slightly higher calorie intake. So about 10 to 20% of calories you want to increase. So if you're eating, let's say, 2,500 calories per day, you probably want to get about 250, maybe up to 500 more calories per day to help support that injury recovery. But as I mentioned, we also have to take into account that change in energy expenditure if you're exercising less as a result of your injury. So energy intake is the one that seems to, or that we have the most data on, that is just really important. We don't want to undereat. And so that's the first place that I would say most people should start, is really focusing on overall energy intake. The second thing, and it goes right in line with that, is protein intake. because protein is going to provide the amino acids that are going to be used to repair that tissue. And so we need to make sure that we're eating enough protein, and you probably want to increase your protein intake while you're recovering from an injury. So the general guidelines there are about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. If you're someone who is trying to make sure that you're maintaining muscle and you're more physically inactive, you might want to be on that higher end. You might want to go even higher than that. Let's say, for example, you're a bodybuilder, you're trying to maintain a lot of muscle, you're physically inactive, you're going to need a little bit more protein in order to maintain that muscle. And even then, you're going to have some muscle mass loss, of course. But you probably want to really go high on the protein overall so that you're supporting that and giving your body the maximal likelihood of losing as little muscle as possible during that injury recovery. So protein intake is going to be the second thing we really want to focus on. So overall calories, and then protein intake and calories. It's going to depend on, again, your activity levels, but we do want to eat a little bit more when you're recovering from injury. So if you don't change your activity levels and you're currently eating, let's say, 2,500 calories per day, you want to increase that about 10 to 20%. But again, you want to adjust for that if your activity levels change.
Yeah, so the biggest point is they shouldn't be in a deficit and they shouldn't be losing mass because of the repair process that needs to be occurring, especially if it's a postoperative consideration or rehab when there's just more trauma to the tissues and more potential calories need to be placed. But like you said, it's a balance because it's weighing the inactivity or relative inactivity with the energetic demands of recovery. So caloric intake, protein intake, those are two major priorities. What are things that you think people are mistakenly viewing as the priorities that actually don't really matter that much, or there's not much evidence for?
Supplementation. And I think supplementation of all types. So protein intake and overall calorie intake, those are the two most important things. The other thing, and this one's complicated, is micronutrient intake. So there's a lot of different micronutrients that are important for inflammatory processes, that are important for tissue repair. And the simplest way to approach this is we just need to be making sure that we're meeting our basic micronutrient needs. The recommended dietary allowances for the variety of different micronutrients the 26 essential vitamins and minerals that we need for essential function, because you're going to need some calcium, you're going to need some zinc, you're going to need some vitamin A to repair that tissue, you're going to need some vitamin C and some vitamin E to help with antioxidant, to like reduce some of the antioxidant, like pro-oxidant damage and reduce that oxidative stress. And all of these micronutrients are going to be important. And what a lot of people tend to try to do is they try to supplement with certain micronutrients as opposed to getting it from our diet and making sure that we're eating a well-balanced diet that's providing all of that. And the evidence there is just not there. It's actually seems to actually have a negative effect in some cases, because so for example, a lot of times people, they think, okay, there's an inflammatory response going on, we want to reduce that inflammation, let's take antioxidants. So a lot of times people supplement with like vitamin C or vitamin E, and they use these antioxidant nutrients as supplements. And that can actually cause our body to reduce our internal antioxidant defense systems and actually have a negative effect. So if you're taking a bunch of supplemental antioxidants and that's taking you to a super physiological level in terms of antioxidant levels, your body will produce less of there's different types of antioxidants that our body produces like internally, and your body will produce less of those if you're taking a lot of antioxidant supplements. So there's a few studies that have shown that this can be the case, and there's also evidence to suggest that when you're doing that, you're also interfering with the inflammatory response, and that inflammatory response is actually important for helping with tissue repair. So if you're taking really high, so a lot of people right after an injury, they'll take a bunch of anti-inflammatory supplements that reduces, if it does reduce that inflammatory response, that's actually interfering with tissue repair. Whereas if you're eating those nutrients, you're not getting them at the levels that are you're gonna get through a supplement. So they're not going to actually have that same level of effect in terms of increasing your blood levels to super physiological levels like that.
Yeah, that seems to be a common misconception of we need to get the inflammation down as quickly as possible, but that is there for a reason and it's helpful. So supplementation, especially with supplements that aren't evidence-based or proven to be effective, or it's these super physiological levels, like you said, are there supplements that you do recommend from supplementing protein intake through a whey protein or creatine? Are there things that you do have leeway or that there is evidence for during this rehab process or in general?
Yeah, so I think supplementing with the protein for sure to meet your protein needs. There's a lot of people who will use collagen as thinking that it's going to help with injury recovery. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially if you're using it to meet your protein needs. But there's no evidence to show that collagen has some special unique benefits for injury repair. Now, I do want to say, and you're going to hear me say a lot of like, okay, we don't have a lot of evidence for that. It's really difficult to get evidence in this topic when it comes to injury repair and specific nutrients. So a lot of times we're looking for like very specific things that we should be doing or we could do to enhance repair or enhance recovery. But that's really difficult to get studies on, because what we have to do is we have to take people who just get injured and we have to get them all at the right time, all at the same time, to try to control it as much as possible. And then we have to get these people to all take a supplement. And there's other factors involved in their rehab that's gonna be variable between people. So if everyone's taking a supplement, but one person's doing, one type of physical rehabilitation and someone's doing something else, how do we compare them? So it's really difficult to do these studies because of all of the variables that go into it. And then if you're giving someone a supplement, it's hard to control diet. There's so many different factors with diet that come into play that you have to have such large sample sizes to control for all of this. And it's really difficult to do because then we have to look at certain outcomes. Like if we give someone, let's say, because there's some people that there's some mechanistic evidence to suggest that omega-3 fish oils may be helpful. But are we going to take, if we take people and we give them omega-3 fish oils, what outcomes are we looking at? Are we expecting them to actually have a slower recovery time or a quicker recovery time that is noticeable between groups just with an omega-3 fish oil? Probably not. And that's the challenge with nutrition is there's so many small variables. In each of these small variables, it's going to be difficult to tease out which specific one is important or is one making a significant enough difference for it to be noticeable. So the things that we mainly focus on is the overall calories, the overall protein, making sure that you're meeting your nutrient needs, because these are the things that we know are going to make a big difference. And then when it comes to the things beyond that, I would say focus mainly on the things that you're doing in your overall lifestyle to be healthy, and the things that you were already doing before. Try to keep those routines in place as much as possible throughout your injury so that you don't get off track with certain things. But I wouldn't put too much into place on trying to do too much with your nutrition and get extremely specialized, because you're probably not going to get the benefits that you're going to get out of that are probably going to outweigh, or they're not going to outweigh all of the effort that it's going to be required to try to get extremely meticulous with your nutrition. If you have the main pieces in place, that's going to take you 80-90% in terms of what you're going to get in terms of recovery. And everything else, I'd say really getting your micronutrient intake, making sure that you're eating a very nutritious diet. And then, some of the things, so one of the things I do want to say, a lot of the nutrients that are required for tissue repair are concentrated in animal foods. So there may be, and we just don't have evidence for this, but I would probably be willing to bet that if we took two groups of people and put one group on a little bit higher animal food diet during recovery, that there would be some advantages there, because the zinc, the vitamin A, the iron, a lot of these nutrients that are really helpful for tissue repair come from animal tissues. And so if you're eating a little bit more of these animal foods, you're probably going to get a little bit more of these nutrients. Now, some people think, oh, well, let me take that to the extreme and only eat animal foods or go to that level. And that's when we go to these super physiological levels that are unnecessary. So there's a certain amount of zinc that your body needs in order to help repair tissue. And if you eat beyond that, it's not going to be helpful. It's actually going to start to cause negative effects because there's upper limits of what we can benefit from. So let's say, for example, you start eating a diet that's, you heard zinc is helpful, so you start eating a lot of oysters, and then you start to create a copper deficiency and start to have negative effects from that. So we never want to take things to extremes, but I would say that probably leaning a little bit more in that direction if you are someone who tends to kind of limit those foods, eating a little bit more during recovery, having a little bit more dairy, having a little bit more eggs, maybe a little bit more meat in your diet. And again, this is theoretical, but I would say that this would probably be helpful because of the micronutrients that are going to come along with the protein that you're going to be getting, because those are very protein rich foods. So if you're eating a diet that kind of leans in that direction, it's probably going to be more helpful for recovery.
For these populations where they may be athletes or general population, and they may not have, prior to the injury, a lot of cognitive oversight on their diet, but you want to just make sure that they're accomplishing those big rocks, like you said, of enough calories and enough protein are the two big things. For people that are really new to understanding how many calories they're taking in a day or the amount of protein, do you have general recommendations or strategies you use to make it pretty straightforward for someone to make sure that they're hitting these big rocks without them feeling too overwhelmed?
Yeah, so if someone is not losing weight, then they should be eating enough calories. So a very simple way to go about it is if you're losing weight, that's not a good thing. Like if you're losing weight during recovery, that's not where you want to be. You're not eating enough calories. In terms of protein, and honestly, in this one, like if you're really just focusing on protein, oftentimes that covers the calories because you'll get a lot of calories from the protein. But I would say just calculate out like I always will have people like calculate protein needs. Easy one, just kind of go on the higher end, like 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight. And so if someone's we use numbers that are less than this for individuals who are carrying higher amounts of body fat, but I'm talking about kind of more athletic populations who are healthier, who are not, carrying higher amounts of body fat. That 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight is usually about a good range. If someone is carrying more body fat, the what some people do is say use the 0.8 to 1 gram based on like if they had a BMI of 25. So you calculate what a BMI of 25 would be at their height, and then you use that same amount. So there's different ways to go about it. I don't like to be too meticulous about very specific numbers. We just kind of make sure that you're eating in a range and you have a general understanding of, okay, this is where I need to be. And I mean, our body doesn't, like, we don't need very specific numbers of everything. It's just like, we need enough. And as long as you're getting enough. And so that 0.8 to 1 gram will get you to the enough. And so let's say you're 150 pounds, that 0.8 is going to be, 120 grams to 150 grams. And then, so you just split that over, let's say you eat 3 meals per day and you eat 2 snacks. Let's say you try to hit 35 grams per meal, and then just try to get some in your snacks. And then you can just track your meals for a couple of days and just figure out your various protein sources, put your meal into an app, or just look at the protein amount in each food and just track the amount of protein that you're eating. Oftentimes I give my clients like templates so that they can see, okay, this is what that looks like. But that, being able to do that and eat, just making sure that you're eating 35 per meal. In my opinion, beyond injury, like this is so helpful for like just living a healthy life, is understanding the general amount of calories and protein that your body needs in each meal, and then, learning how to eat meals that provide you with that. That will help you to keep a healthy body composition for your entire life. It will help with injury recovery, but if you also do this, just because when I'm saying this, like body composition comes down to how many calories you eat and how much protein you eat. Like almost everything else is inconsequential. These are the two main, most important things that drive body composition. So if you spend this time and understand, okay, my calorie needs are for example, my calorie needs are about 3,200 calories per day. I'm 205 pounds. I eat about 175 grams of protein per day, probably shoot for that, around that. And so for me, I'm trying to eat about 800 calorie meals with, about 40, 50 grams of protein. And if I do that and have a couple of snacks, I generally can keep a healthy body composition without really thinking about it. And I can eat meals that I enjoy. So I have everything that I enjoy, I can make into an 800 calorie meal that has 40 or 50 grams of protein. I can make spaghetti or tacos or burgers or pretty much anything into that type of meal. And over time, you learn how to do that. And it makes it really easy to kind of maintain your body composition and eat the right amount, right amount of calories and protein for your needs. And beyond body composition, because when I talk about calories, sometimes people don't like to hear about it because they're like, oh, well, there's just so much negativity around controlling calories and eating less calories. But the reality is our body has energy needs, and these energy needs are measured by calories, and your body needs a certain amount of calories to a certain amount of energy to carry out the processes that it needs to do on a day-to-day basis. And it's just like the amount of gas that you put in your car. Right? It's important if you don't want to be on empty, or if you don't want to put too much gas into your car, it's important to have like a fuel gauge and understand how much you're putting in and using on a regular basis. And so I think it's helpful for a lot of people to just gain that understanding. And it's not that you have to track forever or, be obsessed with it. It's just, what does my body generally need and what am I putting into my system on a regular basis? And if you get a general understanding of that and learn how to balance that out, it's really helpful for both injury recovery, but also just generally for maintaining a healthy body composition over the course of your lifetime.
The athlete or the patient is aware of these priorities at this point, and there's maybe some questions that they have in regards to the timing of these things, the calories, the protein throughout the day or throughout their rehab or training. Can you just touch on how important or how much variability there is and the windows of when they can consume calories throughout the day and what matters?
Yeah. So in terms of, so when you say the timing, mainly within each day, are we talking about within the day?
Yeah, let's say that kind of old school thought if there needs to be at these windows, people need to eat. Can you touch on, is that actually a thing? And, throughout the day, how much variability is there of when they can consume these calories?
Yeah, so the evidence there is some evidence to suggest that eating your calories, like putting a little bit more calories earlier in the day, may be helpful from a metabolic health standpoint. But outside of that, in the difference is marginal. Like people just have slightly better glucose control the next day when they eat their calories earlier in the day, and that could just be because the people who eat their larger meal at night, they just have more calories in their system when they're doing the test in the morning. So there's other factors that can be involved, but there's some evidence to suggest, there's a couple studies that suggest that when you have more of your calories in the morning, that's probably a little bit advantageous. And it would make sense because you're eating your calories and then you're using them versus you're eating them and then you're going straight to bed. So there's a little bit of, evidence there for that. But outside of that, in terms of, recovery or body composition, the when you eat your calories is almost inconsequential. Like I said, the total calories and protein matter. When we do studies where they compare one meal versus three, it doesn't seem to make a big difference. And so I always tell people what's most important is what's convenient for you and what helps you to feel satisfied and satiated throughout the day, because that's going to be the most important thing. If you're trying to follow these specific guidelines of when to eat because someone told you to, but then you're hungry all the time and it doesn't work for you because you have to go to work at this certain time, and it's just not going to work for you. So at the end of the day, you have to look at your own lifestyle and what makes sense for you, and then adjust those things. That the times that you eat can make a difference for a lot of people in terms of like energy levels and hunger. So I always tell people, like, play around with your because some people will say, well, what do I do for, I'm hungry at this point of the day? And I'm like, well, maybe just push your breakfast back a little bit. You said you weren't hungry in the morning anyway, so just push that back an hour, and maybe that'll hold you over till lunch a little bit better. So I do think that moving around your meal times can be really helpful, but there's no special formula of when you need to eat in order to get the best results.
We've discussed that a lot on this podcast in regards to exercise in movement, and there's no one magic time, there's no one magic exercise. And that can be very freeing because it allows for so much variability to fit into someone's life and the routine and make it realistic and consistent. And that sounds very similar for nutrition of we have big priorities and things we need to hit, but outside of that, there's a big bandwidth of how people can accomplish those things. Again, going back to the calorie intake, and we don't want them to be losing weight during this rehab process. A way is to check your body weight on the scale. How do you balance someone checking in with their body weight and make sure they're not under eating and losing weight, or they're overeating and they're gaining weight during this process without it becoming so it becomes an issue where they're neurotic about their daily weight? Like, can you touch on the day-to-day fluctuations and how much weight and fluid someone may be kind of losing and gaining, and discussing that with clients, but also your recommendations of how often people should be checking in with their body weight if they're trying to make sure they're not under eating or overeating?
Yeah, so this one, there's gray area here because I definitely wouldn't recommend that for everyone. There are people who have a history of, not a good relationship with the scale, where I wouldn't recommend that, and would probably discuss with them of the various options of potentially, tracking calories or just following a specific template of diet. So we'd calculate their calories. I'd say, hey, your calorie needs are 2,400. This is what that looks like. Let's try to just, model your diet similar to this. Make sure your portions are about this size to make sure that you're eating enough. But generally, I think the best way to do it is the more data, the better, and the more controlled, the better. So if you can detach yourself from the daily data that you're tracking and understand that you're just tracking data, then doing it every single day, first thing in the morning, is very helpful. And as you mentioned, it will help people to see some of these daily fluctuations. And if you compare those to the weekly averages, you'll understand that the daily fluctuations often don't reflect what's actually going on. It will blow some people's minds how their day-to-day fluctuations do not make sense. How, you'll go on you won't eat a lot one day and you'll gain 3 pounds because of holding on to more water weight, eating a little bit more salt, not sleeping well, and also with injury, having more inflammation and fluid buildup there, that makes a difference. And so I typically, it helps to provide a little bit of education on what influences day-to-day fluctuations. Water weight, and then also the carbohydrates we eat will influence water weight changes as well. And then gauge where clients are, and if they are comfortable with seeing this scale data as data and something that we're just using to track information and using it as information, then doing it daily, I think, is probably the best approach, because it helps to show how variable it is. Like, it's scale. If you've never weighed yourself daily on the scale, it will just blow your mind how it goes up and down sometimes, and up and down in ways that you would not expect. Like, it even confuses me, and I know how all of this works really well. And there are times where I step on the scale and I'm like, how does this make sense if I'm like tracking on a regular basis? Or sometimes I don't weigh myself on a normal basis, but if I'm ever trying to change my body composition, which I don't normally try to do, every once in a while I might, but I will weigh daily just for that data, and it will still confuses me some days where I'm like, I'm completely dialed in, and then the next day it's like 2 pounds up. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. But it's water weight fluctuations. Our bodies our bodies will the water weight that our bodies carry will be influenced by sodium, by hormones, by sleep, by stress levels, by various different factors that we can't really control.
Yeah, so to recap, more data points can be more beneficial, and understanding that there's going to be fluctuation and seeing that throughout multiple weeks gives people an understanding of what is kind of normal for them and those fluctuations. But then individuals that have prior experiences with, maybe disordered eating or poor views of trying to manage this with some level of distancing, like you said, that can be a different approach, that the scale maybe doesn't need to be a constant theme. And like you said, having a nutrition plan or calories in place, so the consistency is there without having to actually step on a scale, maybe a healthier option for some people.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention there, because some people will think, oh, more data, I don't, that's not a good thing necessarily. I don't want to weigh every day. But if you weigh once a week, for example, and you catch yourself on a day where that is especially abnormal, it can really throw you off for an entire week in thinking that you're completely off track. And that's where I say that the day-to-day, the weighing can give you just information about the day-to-day fluctuations. Whereas if you're not weighing every day, or if you're doing like a weekly thing, it's not going to help you understand that. And I have there's a lot of scales that connect to an app, and what I sometimes will recommend with clients is just to cover the scale, and don't like it's just data. So you just step on in the morning, you can put a piece of tape over the number on the scale, and it'll automatically upload to your app. You don't even have to look at it, and then you can see the weekly averages, and every week you can kind of look back into it and see how things were going, and kind of do it that way if you don't want to see that number every day. Because I know, especially for a lot of women, but I know it's the case for a lot of men too, where kind of stepping on the scale and seeing a number that is higher than you would like can really have a negative impact on your entire day. And I know that we don't want to get into that that scenario. But sometimes really just understanding can really help. And I think knowledge of what those day-to-day fluctuations are coming from, and then understanding what's driving kind of weight gain and loss can help a lot of people as well. So I have a podcast episode on energy balance where I talk about all of this, and calories in, calories out, all of the different factors that affect it, hormones and energy, absorption at your gut, and all of the different things. Because weight loss and weight gain is really complicated, and the day-to-day fluctuations are complicated, and what happens over the course of time can be complicated. And so I have a podcast episode where I break down all of that information. I think it's really helpful to for people who have that background of that negative relationship. The knowledge can help to break free from that, and understanding, okay, the scale isn't some mysterious thing that you step on and you have no idea what it's going to say, and it's usually going to be something that you don't like. Just kind of understanding, okay, these are the things that influence the way that my body weight changes and goes up and down, and it really helps to change that relationship a bit.
Going back to the priorities of calories and protein, outside of that, you had alluded to and mentioned that micronutrients matter, but the supplementation of a lot of these, especially in super physiological ranges, is unnecessary or potentially harmful. How do athletes and individuals know if they're hitting sufficient amount of micronutrients without, like you said, it being too in the weeds? What recommendations do you have?
So that's again where, if you really want to get into the weeds, tracking your calories very, very meticulously for a week or two and seeing where you're falling short can be really helpful. So like if you track everything that you eat for a couple of weeks, even for a couple of days, like you should do 2 weekdays and a weekend on 1 week, and then you did it on another week, just to give you a little bit more data. And you would see, okay, I'm a little bit short on calcium, a little bit short on vitamin A, and then you can make some modifications, add a couple high calcium foods. For most people, you're going to be short on a lot of nutrients that you'll probably get from spinach. Like I've worked with a lot of people, and I see it's like, oh, you're short on calcium, short on vitamin A, short on vitamin K, and it's like, just add a cup of spinach and you cover all of that. So spinach is a very micronutrient rich food, and it ends up covering a lot of what people tend to be deficient in, a good portion of it. So but that's very helpful. And then I think for a lot of people, in my opinion, especially I would say, I don't think there's evidence here. I haven't seen any data on this, and I've looked. So I might have missed this research, but I don't think there's any data to show like multivitamin intake during injury recovery. But I would be willing to bet that that's probably helpful, and that's something that I typically suggest to a lot of my clients, because it's difficult to meet every single nutrient need. And so sometimes just taking a multivitamin, and I have a podcast on this as well, because there's a few studies that have shown, because you'll see these headlines of like, multivitamin intake does not have any benefit on health. And what they're doing is they're taking these massive population-based studies, and they're asking people whether or not they took a multivitamin. And this is like, from the last 30 years, when the only multivitamin on the market was these like crappy Flintstone and Centrum vitamins. And this is like, if people are taking a multivitamin, this is what they're taking. That data, in my opinion, is not that strong in order to be able to say like, hey, they're not beneficial. There's a lot of studies that have used multivitamins in randomized control trials with various health outcomes. So people with ADD, for example, people with anxiety, people with depression, and they've shown positive effects from use of a multivitamin because they're filling in micronutrient gaps. So for example, if you're not eating enough zinc, if you're not eating enough B6, you might be at higher risk for, anxiety, for example, and the multivitamin is covering those bases. And in general, most people just aren't meeting all of our nutrient needs. So I'm a big fan of a multivitamin. The evidence isn't there to show this. This is one where I think if it was done, this study was done with a high quality multivitamin, like there may be able to show some benefits of using that, because it is like, you are going to be getting zinc, you are going to be getting vitamin A, you are going to be getting these nutrients that are important for tissue repair. So from a mechanism, perspective, it would make sense. And so this is one that I would say it makes it easier, because you can try to fill all these nutrient gaps with your nutrition, but I think it's just easier to take in. So I take a multivitamin. I don't take it every day. I take one every other day just to get a baseline dose of some of the things that I may, because some days I just don't eat enough B12 or B6, and just taking a multivitamin ensures that I'm getting some of those nutrients by taking like kind of a smaller dose of those.
I have a few follow-up questions, but the first one, let's say it's multivitamin or a protein powder or a creatine or any type of supplement or vitamins. There's that industry is giant. How do individuals find trusted supplement companies and resources?
Yes, that's so challenging. So I've talked about this on my podcast quite a bit too, and I know I keep alluding to this, but this is challenging because that industry is one of the shadiest industries around. A lot of companies are selling products that don't have what they say they have in them. They're contaminated with things that they're not supposed to have in them. But one of the like baseline things you want to look for is third-party testing. And so you want to look for companies that are using third parties they're sending their products off and they're getting that tested, and that company's sending them a certificate of authenticity showing that it has what it says it has and it doesn't have any other contaminants. And you want them to be very clear about that and to list it on their site. You want them to be very clear about, hey, we do all third party testing. This is the company we use. This is where you can find the results. Because a lot of companies will say it, and then you can't find it anywhere on their site or anywhere else. And so I'd go there first, because you want to just shop with transparent companies. There's companies that are trying to be transparent and trying to put out a high quality product, and then there's others that are trying to use buzzwords in order to sell you stuff. So look for that. Look for third party tested. One of the brands that I like is called Legion. They use a lot of they do third party testing, and then they also pretty much all of the dosing that they use in their supplements is going to be based on research studies, and usually it's based on human studies. They're pretty good about doing that. So that in terms of like sports nutrition, that's one of the supplement companies that I tend to lean towards most. Outside of that, like for multivitamin, Thorne and Pure Encapsulations are also two really good brands that I think put out really good products on more of like the health nutrition side of things. So they're, Thorne, Pure Encapsulations. There's a few others that put out similarly quality products, but they're the main ones that I would say have pretty good line of products, usually pretty good quality. And so for a multivitamin, Pure Encapsulations has a it's called the One multivitamin. Really simple product, has just the basics of what you need. I really like that one. I typically tend to recommend that one. Thorne has a two-a-day multivitamin as well. Pretty solid product as well. So those are like two good options in terms of multivitamins, but it's challenging. Third-party testing is the best thing you do. Stick to very specific brands. I talk about some of this stuff on my podcast in terms of like brands that I recommend and stuff like that, because it's just I can't tell you how many studies I read on supplements, and I still get confused sometimes when purchasing certain things, because there's always a new product on the market. There's always new claims, and that's as a consumer, you have to be really, really careful, because these supplement companies can say anything they want for the most part. There's very little oversight. They can put almost anything into their product. Nobody's testing it, and they can say almost anything they want. They can claim that this is a new fat burning supplement, and it can just be a sugar pill, unfortunately. And so a lot of people are like, so much money is spent on supplements that are completely unnecessary. So definitely overall discourage the use of supplements, but when you do use them, be very smart about it. And as you notice, what we've discussed here, most of the supplements that have evidence for benefit are there to help you meet your micro or macronutrient needs. So, I'm talking about a multivitamin, we're talking about protein powders, we're talking about things that are helping to meet essential nutrient needs. And that's where you really want to, like, if you're taking supplements, that should be where you're spending your time and money first, as opposed to like taking a bunch of herbal supplements that usually have some risks associated with them and likely aren't going to be very beneficial.
We haven't touched on fluid intake. Do you have recommendations or guidelines on, does this change based on a rehab or surgery? And what do your general recommendations for fluid intake entail?
Yeah, so I'm not aware of if fluid needs change. I would guess they go up just a little bit, just like with energy needs, and again, dependent on overall activity levels, and then also just kind of the severity of the injury and the degree of the inflammatory response that's occurring. But overall, the easiest thing with fluid intake is you just want your when you go to the restroom, you want it to be not yellow and not clear. So a pale yellow color. And if that's, when you're going to the restroom, that's the color of your urine, then you're well hydrated. If it's clear, you're consuming too much water. And if there's like a darker yellow shade to it, then you're definitely dehydrated. But yeah, that's the easiest way to go about it. I've given a general guideline, but I always get pushback when I do, because I know there's a lot of variation here. Because so I've said, kind of a half of your body weight in ounces of fluid. So like if you're 200 pounds, about 100 ounces of fluid. Good like general starting place. But anytime I've ever said that on like social media, I get a lot of pushback, because then people are like, well, some people have a lot higher hydration needs, some people have lower hydration needs. So again, hydration depends, because some people live in hotter climates, some people are more active, they sweat more. But that's a good general starting place. But looking at the color of your urine is best way to know whether or not you personally are well hydrated.
And this may be too much of a rabbit hole or a detour out of the topic, but for these athletes that their end stage rehab, their training's looking more and more like normalcy, and they are sweating a lot, they have a lot of volume and intensity of training, is there value and guidelines in electrolyte or salt intake? Is there any recommendations you have there?
Yeah. So again, fluid with sodium replacement, that one's extremely complicated as well. I have a podcast episode where I interviewed one of my friends who's she used to be the dietitian for the LA Clippers, and they're doing like electrolyte testing, and then they're basically testing their athletes. They're seeing how much fluid they lose. They're seeing how much of that is sodium. So they look at the percentage amount of sodium so that they can know how much to replace. So there is going to be a loss. And when it comes to replacing electrolytes, the main electrolyte that we need to replace is sodium. And so a lot of people, there's all these fancy electrolyte supplements. They're mostly just salt. And so if you're sweating a lot, and one of the ways to kind of determine whether or not you're losing a lot of salt is if it tastes very salty, then you're probably losing a lot of salt, and you need to replace some of that. Or if you're seeing like crystals on your shirt, or you're finding like you can feel like a little bit of grittiness on your skin, there may be a little bit more salt loss for you, and you may need to replace that a little bit more. But that is highly variable, again, from person to person in terms of the appropriate amount of electrolytes to replace. These electrolyte drinks are fine. They just can be costly. So like most of them are, $1.50 to $2.50 per serving, and it's usually, a gram of salt and maybe a little bit of magnesium and potassium. But the magnesium and potassium you could easily get through your food, and the sodium you could easily get through just a little bit of salt. So these drinks, they make it easy and they can be helpful, especially like, so there's some that I think it's liquid IV that also comes with a little bit of glucose, which will help with your body absorbing that water a little bit more quickly. So that one can help with like hydrating a little bit more quickly. But overall, yeah, the amount of sodium that you need to replace is going to be just highly variable. That's the challenge with nutrition, is we have general guidelines, and then especially when it comes to athletes and individuals who are there's so much variability among the types of activity, the weather you're doing it in, the amount you're sweating, and then your own individual propensity to sweat and lose sodium as well.
These recommendations you've discussed, and the really big ones early on, calories, protein intake, do you feel like it's appropriate for rehab providers to have these discussions with athletes, or is it always let's defer to a dietitian or make that consult? What do you think is kind of comfortable for a rehab professional to discuss with an athlete during this rehab process from a nutrition standpoint? And what do you think is very much a defer to a nutrition professional?
So I think that everything that we've discussed here, if you are a rehab professional and you listen to this and you're interested in nutrition and you spend a little bit of time learning about this topic, and you listen to this episode, maybe dig into a few of these topics a little bit more, there's several research papers that you can read that kind of outline a lot of this. And again, you're going to find in these studies that they just say, we don't really have much data for a lot of this. And so, but if you're doing that, then I think it's perfectly fine to have a discussion about everything that we're talking about with your patients. You're not providing any medical nutrition therapy. You're providing general guidelines for people. It's simple enough. Now, the time when I think it would be appropriate to refer to a registered dietitian is if you're making these recommendations and your patient is they're having problems for whatever reason, or they have other comorbidities that complicate the recommendations that you're making. So let's say, for example, like we discussed a second ago, someone has an eating disorder, and you start to make some of these recommendations. They demonstrate that they're experiencing some psychological distress by trying to implement them. That would be a good time to refer to a registered dietitian. Similar if you're working with someone and you make these recommendations and they're just not, they don't know where to start. They need help with planning their meals. They need help with all of the basics of getting everything started. Like we discussed, they just don't have that background right now. That'd be another good time to say, hey, I these things are helpful, but in terms of getting someone to sit down with you and plan meals and all of that, like I would recommend kind of working with the dietitian for that as well. So I think in those circumstances, referring to a dietitian, but I think in most cases, especially depending on your population, because a lot of people injury rehab setting, a lot of sports, if it's sports specific, you're working with a lot of athletes. A lot of them are pretty well astute with their nutrition, and you can provide them these general guidelines, and they can implement them on their own without any additional professional guidance. So I think in many cases, people are going to be fine in implementing these simple guidelines on their own. But I think there are some cases where comorbidities, where a registered dietitian could step in and really provide some value.
Is there anything that you feel like we didn't touch on that you want to discuss or bring up before we wrap up in this realm of nutrition and dietary priorities in the context of rehab?
Yeah, so quick thing that I do think is important, and I kind of thought I would mention it, but I don't think I did, is the most important thing is what you're doing before you got injured, and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis and how you're living your lifestyle. So, it isn't that you get injured and then you start making these nutritional changes and it's going to make this huge difference. If you've already been eating a healthier diet, if you've already been supporting yourself with nourishing yourself with the right amount of calories and not under eating, and eating the right amount of protein and eating a micronutrient rich diet, that's going to set your body up to be as healthy as possible to be able to recover from these injuries. And so that, I think, is the most important thing, is like the injury recovery process starts, from the beginning in terms of the way that you live your lifestyle. And as I mentioned, some of the things that I talked about in terms of eating the right amount of calories and protein, like that translates into just a general healthy lifestyle. So I think something that I would recommend is, if you're thinking about this, like just from an injury perspective, like nutrition is going to set you up to be healthier, to be able to recover from that, and so that's just going to start much before when you get injured. So if that's when the changes occur, it's probably not going to help very much, if the main changes occur after you get injured. But if you're making, all of these nutritional choices and taking care of your nutrition leading up to the injury, then it's going to put your body in a place of health that's going to set it up to have the best opportunity to heal as quickly as possible.
Yeah, and if that's not the case, it can be potentially a great process for an individual to become familiar with the habits and routines that they can set up during the rehab and after, of, like you said, eating enough calories, hitting the micronutrients, hitting enough protein, that it almost jumpstarts that process because they have an injury, and those discussions can occur. And it's similar for people that maybe are sedentary and come in within a rehab perspective, and now you're trying to kind of jumpstart their physical activity and movement recommendations. And the best thing would have been to have a habit prior to them coming into the healthcare system, but the next best thing is to start that process now.
I love that, because I always tell people, any opportunity or any major shift that causes you to get thrown off of your normal routine is a good opportunity to make some positive changes. So sometimes some positive can come out of an injury. Is you make some better choices with your nutrition, you start to be more intentional about it, and this lasts, and as you mentioned, this can make way for healthy lifestyle changes that persist beyond.
I think that's a great place to stop. We'll link your Instagram, your podcast, and the information for people who want to contact you. Adrian, this was awesome. Thank you so much. We'll call it there.
Yeah, thank you.